She was just a waitress, invisible to the world. He was a billionaire, too powerful to be questioned. But when she gave him a warning no one else dared to, what happened next changed both their lives forever. The restaurant was packed, the clinking of glasses and muffled conversations filling the air. Sophie moved quickly between tables, balancing trays, forcing smiles. It was just another exhausting night. Until he walked in. The man was impossible to miss. Dressed in an expensive suit, with an air of quiet authority, he took a corner table like he owned the place. Because, in a way, he did. Ethan Steele, billionaire investor, ruthless businessman, owner of this very restaurant chain. Sophie swallowed hard. She had heard the rumors. He didn't tolerate mistakes. He didn't believe in second chances. She approached his table, keeping her voice steady. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you something to drink?" Ethan barely glanced at her. "Whiskey, neat." Sophie nodded and hurried away, but something felt off. She had served countless customers before, but there was something about Ethan tonight. Something different. His shoulders were tense, his jaw was clenched, and most importantly, he hadn't touched his phone once. She returned with his drink, but before she could leave, she hesitated. Then, against every rule, against every warning in her mind, she spoke. "You should leave," she whispered. Ethan's eyes slowly lifted to meet hers, sharp, calculating, dangerous. "Excuse me?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Sophie's pulse raced. She had already said too much. She should just walk away. But something inside her wouldn't let her. She leaned in slightly. "There's something off about the men at that table." She nodded toward a group in the corner. "They've been watching you since you walked in." Ethan didn't react, not visibly, but his eyes flickered ever so slightly, and Sophie knew he had already noticed. For a long moment, he just studied her. Then, without another word, he reached for his whiskey and took a slow sip. Sophie's heart sank. Maybe she had overstepped. Maybe she had just cost herself her job. But then, he did something she never expected. He set the glass down, stood up, and without looking back, walked straight out of the restaurant. Minutes later, the men at the corner table followed, but by then, Ethan Steele was gone. Sophie exhaled shakily. She had no idea what she had just stopped. But the next morning, when a black luxury car pulled up outside her tiny apartment, she realized Ethan Steele wasn't done with her yet. Sophie stood frozen at the entrance of her tiny apartment complex, watching the sleek black car pull up. The engine hummed softly, but its presence was loud. People in her neighborhood didn't drive cars like that, especially not for someone like her. The back door opened, and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped out. He wasn't Ethan Steele, but from the sharp look in his eyes, he worked for him. Sophie Carter. His voice was firm. Her pulse raced. "Who's asking?" The man didn't blink. "Mr. Steele would like to see you." Sophie's stomach tightened. She had expected consequences for speaking to him last night, but not this. She straightened her shoulders. "If he wants to fire me, he can do it in person at the restaurant." The man's expression didn't change. "He's not looking to fire you." He gestured toward the car. "Please, get in." Sophie hesitated. Every instinct told her that stepping into a billionaire's car was a bad idea. But another part of her, the same part that made her warn Ethan last night, was curious. With a deep breath, she climbed inside. The air inside the car smelled of leather and expensive cologne, and sitting across from her, completely composed, was Ethan Steele. He studied her for a moment, then said something that sent a chill down her spine. "You saved my life last night." Sophie's breath caught. "What?" Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Those men weren't just watching me. They were waiting, a setup. If I had stayed..." He let the words linger, letting her fill in the blanks. Sophie swallowed hard. She had known something was off, but she hadn't realized it was life or death. Ethan tilted his head. "Tell me, Sophie, how did you know?" She hesitated before answering. "I've seen men like that before. They weren't drunk. They weren't eating. They were just waiting." Ethan's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, but something close. "You have good instincts," he said, "and I need people like that." Sophie frowned. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned back, his piercing gaze locked onto her. "I want to offer you a job." Sophie blinked. "A job?" "Not at the restaurant," Ethan said smoothly. "Something better." Her heart pounded. What was he saying? Then, Ethan Steele did something that changed her life forever. He pulled out a contract, slid it across the seat toward her, and said, "Work for me, Sophie, and trust me, you'll never have to wait tables again." Sophie stared at the contract in front of her, her fingers curling into fists. This had to be a joke. "Work for you?" she echoed, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan nodded. "You saw something last night that most people wouldn't have noticed. You trusted your instincts, and you were right." Sophie shook her head. "I'm just a waitress. I don't know anything about whatever world you live in." Ethan leaned back, watching her closely. "That's exactly why I need you. You see things differently. People ignore those who serve them, Sophie, but you don't ignore anyone." Sophie's heart pounded. This wasn't just some job offer. Ethan Steele was a billionaire. He had security, analysts, people who could detect threats. Yet he was sitting here, offering her a seat at his table. "Why me?" she asked cautiously. Ethan smirked. "Because I don't believe in coincidences. You were in the right place at the right time for a reason." Sophie exhaled, looking down at the contract. The words blurred together, but one thing stood out: the salary. Her breath caught. More money in 1 month than she made in an entire year. Her mind screamed that this was too good to be true, that men like Ethan Steele didn't offer jobs to waitresses they met once. But something in her gut told her this was real. And if she said yes, her life would never be the same. She met Ethan's gaze, searching for any sign of deception. "What exactly would I be doing?" she asked. Ethan's smirk deepened. "Whatever I need you to." Sophie inhaled sharply. This was dangerous. This was insane. But it was also an opportunity she couldn't ignore. With a final breath, she reached for the pen. "I'm in." Ethan's expression didn't change, but she could tell this was exactly the answer he expected. She signed her name, sealing her fate. And as Ethan took the contract back, he said something that made her stomach twist. "Welcome to my world, Sophie." Sophie barely had time to process what she had just done. The moment her pen left the paper, Ethan tapped the window and the car pulled forward, smoothly merging into the city traffic. She exhaled slowly. "So, what now?" Ethan glanced at her, amused. "Now you start training." Sophie frowned. "Training for what exactly?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled out a sleek phone and handed it to her. "Your new work phone. Your personal number won't be used for anything related to me." Sophie hesitated before taking it. The device felt heavier than it should have, as if she had just stepped into something far bigger than herself. Ethan continued, his voice calm but firm. "You'll be given tasks, shadow my security team, and learn how to analyze situations. You'll be expected to anticipate threats before they happen." Sophie blinked. "Threats? I thought this was just about what happened last night." Ethan leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "Sophie, I don't think you understand. Last night wasn't random." A chill ran down her spine. "What do you mean?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Someone wanted me there. Someone wanted me distracted." Sophie felt her pulse quicken. This wasn't just about hiring her because she had good instincts. This was bigger. "Wait, you think someone set you up?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Ethan nodded once. "And I need to find out who. That's why you're here." Sophie swallowed hard. "I don't know anything about corporate espionage or crime." Ethan smirked slightly. "That's what makes you useful. You're not predictable. No one will see you coming." Sophie sat back, gripping the phone tightly. This wasn't just a job. This was a test, a game, a world she had never belonged to, and she had just agreed to play. Ethan studied her for a long moment before saying, "Are you ready for this?" Sophie took a shaky breath. She wasn't sure. But it was too late to back out now. "Yes." Ethan nodded approvingly. "Good, because this isn't just about me anymore." His voice dropped slightly. "Now, you're a target too." Sophie's heart stopped. What had she just gotten herself into? Sophie felt the weight of Ethan's words settle over her like a storm cloud. "Now, you're a target too." Her fingers instinctively tightened around the phone he had given her. "What exactly am I a target for?" Ethan exhaled, looking out the window as the city blurred past. "The people who tried to set me up last night. They don't know about you yet, but they will, and when they do, they'll want to know why I trust you." He turned back to her, his gaze sharp. "That means they'll either try to use you or eliminate you." Sophie's stomach twisted. "Great. So I basically just signed up for a death wish?" Ethan smirked, the amusement barely reaching his eyes. "Not if you're smart." She let out a dry laugh. "I'm a waitress, Ethan. I don't have bodyguards, I don't know self-defense, and I definitely don't know how to play in whatever high-stakes game you're involved in." Ethan studied her carefully. "You'll learn." Sophie scoffed. "And if I don't?" Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "Then you won't survive." A cold shiver ran down Sophie's spine. He wasn't joking. Before she could respond, the car slowed down, pulling into an underground parking garage. The driver stepped out without a word, opening the door for Ethan first. He got out smoothly, then turned to Sophie, waiting. She hesitated before stepping out, her heart pounding. The air in the garage was thick with silence, the kind that felt dangerous. Ethan led her toward a private elevator. The moment they stepped inside, he pressed his thumb against a fingerprint scanner. The doors slid shut. Sophie swallowed hard. "Where are we?" Ethan glanced at her. "My headquarters." The elevator descended instead of rising, and Sophie's pulse quickened. Whatever this place was, it wasn't just an office. When the doors finally opened, Sophie's breath hitched. The room before her was nothing like she expected. Huge monitors covered the walls, displaying security feeds, financial data, and encrypted messages. A team of people in sleek suits worked silently, their focus intense. This wasn't an office. This was a control center. Sophie turned to Ethan, realization crashing over her. "You're not just some billionaire businessman, are you?" Ethan smirked. "I told you, I don't believe in coincidences." He stepped forward, motioning for her to follow. "You wanted to know what you just signed up for?" Sophie took a deep breath and stepped in. There was no turning back now. Sophie stepped inside, feeling like she had just walked into the nerve center of a secret organization. This wasn't a business empire. This was something else. Ethan strode forward confidently, and as he passed, his employees barely glanced up. They were used to this world. Sophie, however, was not. She kept her voice steady. "What exactly is this place?" Ethan turned slightly, studying her reaction. "It's where I control everything." She folded her arms. "Everything? Like what?" Ethan smirked. "Security, investments, deals that never make the news, and now, uncovering who tried to take me down last night." Sophie's stomach twisted. She wasn't naive. She knew billionaires played by different rules, but this was something much bigger than she had imagined. A man in a dark suit approached, handing Ethan a tablet. "We pulled the restaurant footage," he said. "You were right. The men at the corner table weren't just watching you, they were waiting for someone." Ethan's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the footage. "Who were they waiting for?" The man hesitated. "We don't know, but..." He glanced at Sophie. "We know who warned you." Sophie felt her breath hitch as the screen displayed her. There she was, standing next to Ethan's table, leaning in, whispering the warning that had changed everything. Ethan turned to her, his gaze unreadable. "Tell me, Sophie, are you sure you don't know those men?" Sophie frowned. "Of course I don't. I had a feeling something was wrong." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then turned to his security team. "Run a background check on them. Find out who they've been in contact with. Sophie crossed her arms. And what if this leads nowhere? What if I was wrong? Ethan smirked slightly. Then you just get to keep your new job. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. And what exactly is my job, Ethan? Because I thought I was just a waitress who happened to stop something bad from happening. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low but firm. You were. But now, you're the only person in this building I know I can trust. Sophie's pulse quickened. She had walked into a world of power, secrets, and danger. And whether she was ready or not, she was already in too deep.